LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, where else are we? YouTube, wherever you might be seeing this. Hello and welcome to WaterCooler Wednesday. This is actually our final one of the season. We'll call the year a season to make it seem more official, but this is our last one, and we until the last live one, and we'll talk about that. But we knew we had to do something big, and so I went to the biggest deal friend that I have. And I'm sorry, I just insulted all of my friends except for Kate LeDonne. But but we brought in Kate. She is absolutely amazing. And if you're not following Kate on LinkedIn or wherever else you are, you're
LinkedIn.
also
Yeah,
Instagram.
LinkedIn.
Yeah. But
I'm on
LinkedIn is the place.
Instagram. LinkedIn's probably the place I would channel people to, though.
Yeah, so I know that I'm constantly just scrolling real quick, and I lurk more than I actually like comment on other people's stuff. But when I see a post from Kate, there's 100% of the time I take something away from it. And so Kate is the founder of Brandwise Media, a personal branding agency based in New York, New York, which builds executive and author personal brands using content marketing strategies through social media. Kate has authored the book, The Attraction Magnet, The Seven Insider Secrets the world's biggest brands use to attract customers who can't wait to buy from them, and is regularly featured in national and international publications as a commentator on celebrity and corporate brands. Brandwise Media also developed one of the first online courses centered around LinkedIn, the Influence Academy. And we were just speaking about some of her amazing clients who you would know their names, to teach executives how to position themselves as thought leaders in their respective spaces. To date, over 100 executives have completed the program. Kate, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And the last show at that.
Yeah, it's crazy. So next week we're doing a pre-recorded one because there's going to be like children and animals involved. But this is this is the last live one for the year. So you might not have known about this until about 5 minutes ago, but we start all of these with the 6 and 60. I pulled up the graphic real quick, and I saw your face, and you seemed a little thrown, but that's kind of the point.
Love it.
So, without further ado, are you ready?
As ready as I'm gonna be. I
All
already
right,
say that.
we're gonna do six questions, 60 seconds to answer. You ready? All right,
Yes.
here we go. All right, Kate, what is one thing you would like to see stick around after this pandemic?
Ooh, the human forward empathy that's taken place in the workplace. I love that like kids are in Zoom and people are so much more understanding and not pretending like those parts of our life don't exist.
Love it. While people might think of Baltimore as a big city, you and I know it's Baltimore. And you somehow decided to pick up and leave and go to New York, New York. What has been the biggest challenge in that move?
Moving right before a pandemic. I thought I was going to come up here and never be in my apartment, and then I was quarantined in my in my apartment.
What's been the most rewarding part?
Oh, the humanity. New York is just humans level 1000. Every type of human, every part of the world is represented in this small, weird, wonderful, but thriving island, and I love it.
Love it. One notable trait of your favorite boss of all time.
Oh man, my favorite boss of all time. She had a motto, and it was, in a world where you could be anything, be kind. And she exemplified that through and through, even though she was such a shrewd, smart business person.
When you're feeling overwhelmed or burned out, what do you do to recharge?
Mm, I think a lot of people would go internal and meditate, but I know that I'm an extrovert's extrovert, and some of my core values are sense of belonging. So I usually am with people that I love, and that always recharges me.
Awesome. And final question, what's one thing, like the one thing that most people misunderstand about personal branding?
That it's all about your audience and has nothing to do with you if you do it right.
I love that. Especially that's very difficult because, I think the appeal of being an influencer is, hey, it's about me. So I can imagine that's
You
a
know,
hard
it
switch.
It's interesting when I talk to people and I give presentations on this all the time. I think the first part that a lot of people just don't even break down is the difference in definition between an influencer and a thought leader. And I think a lot of us are gunning for influencership because that's what's kind of out in the zeitgeist of like when you hit a certain point, you're an influencer and you're a LinkedIn influencer.
Right.
But influencers, by definition, are people who kind of like curate a lifestyle and then brands pay them, right? So think of like Instagram to show their products. And in that way, it's really, it is a little bit more about you. And then the brands you can interlace into that. Hi, Letty. So there's that. But when you're a thought leader, and some people use that and some people don't, it's actually about defining expertise and helping your audience get to a certain point. And in that way, it's so much more about the audience and your audience's journey to realization than it is about you. And so I think a lot of people don't even understand that per definition, there's a difference in those. An influencer just gets tossed around so much and may not set us up for success. And you think it's me all the way home because that's what I see influencers doing when really the best of them make their audience feel a certain way about themselves.
Interesting. So influencers trying to sell and influence certain behaviors, right?
Sure.
And then the thought leader is trying to educate above all else. Is that kind of?
Yeah, and listen, it's a gray for sure and it's
Yeah.
nuanced. And you could say an influencer is influencing somebody to be a better version of themselves. And I would argue then that that's probably veering more in the lane, even if you're not consciously doing it, of thought leadership, but using the title influencer. But yeah, at the end of the day, and I think it's like infancy in internet and social media culture, an influencer was somebody who really influenced you to buy certain products or services.
Right.
Whereas somebody who is more of a thought leader or an impactor, that's not even a word that's used. It sounds like I don't know, but that's somebody who's like really trying to up level their audience in a big way. And so a lot of people who have the title of influencer, I would say, yeah, they're doing really great. And at their core, I think it's because they're a thought leader.
Interesting. So there is some crossover, and I'm trying to think of this in terms of internal to the workplace. When you're like, who do you want to be to your employees? In a lot of ways, being a thought leader would influence people, right? Because you're getting them there. But at
Yeah.
the same time, like it's like you said in a LinkedIn post about this episode, everything in life is sales. And
Yeah.
so you're selling to your employees. And so there is that influencer type of thing where you're trying to sell and you need them to buy.
That's such a good point because I think maybe, and I'm just thinking about this out loud on this very live, maybe the difference in the nuance shift is what it is you're selling. And so if you're selling your way, your idea, or a service or a product, it's quite different than if you're selling how somebody's life could be and their highest potential and their future self. And in my experience in sales and thought leadership and influencership, the latter is always going to move the needle.
Yeah.
The former may, but not to the level of impact, speed, or momentum that you will when you're really showing people and selling people on the idea of what they can be, what the organization can be with them, where we're going together versus the how of how we're getting there.
Right. Yes. And when there's an imbalance on those things, it doesn't work, right? I mean,
No.
you need to educate and motivate. We've all seen these motivational speakers that get up there and everybody's, stands up at the end and they're like, "Yes, let's go do it." But if you ask them what it is, they couldn't tell you, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it's somebody once told me this is kind of makes me cringe, but like that listening to motivational speakers can be like eating Chinese food. Like it's like very so rewarding and fulfilling and I'm super full and then like an hour later I'm burping and I'm hungry again and I was like, okay, we could have left out the belch component of that, but I mean it was like a very interesting way that they phrased it. And I think the difference in that is like what's really transformative. And I remember when I went to a WPO event a couple of years ago, Amy Cuddy was there, who, if you all don't know, really brought the world to be aware of the power pose and confidence and how our stature can help with that.
Mhm.
And I remember crying in her presentation, and I could still tell you to this day the different ways and the example she used, and she made us all power pose. And it was really because I think I was seeing a version of myself that hadn't been alive before. Whereas other speakers, I've seen them, I've been totally like enraptured in the moment. But to your point
Right.
afterwards, I couldn't have really put my finger on, oh, these were like the things that stood out to me other than that very juiced up energy at the end of it.
Right, right. And then on the other end of all of this, there's the people that have that great information but not the motivation, right?
Oh, yeah.
And in that space, I think there are some very brilliant people on LinkedIn that I see all the time and they never get any, interaction. And there's this one guy, David Shar. It's like, where is that? No, I'm kidding. But like, but right there's this contingency of like these people who like they don't really they have the message but they don't deliver it in a way that's palatable or that draws people in.
There's definitely a way that you need to be aware of how you're packaging things. And I think that that's really where branding is like positioning and packaging it, because the subtle shifts make the biggest leaps and bounds in terms of that. And things like, okay, if I'm reading right now actively, you can see Build to Sell, and I think it's amazing, and I think every business owner should read it. But all the business books I read, there's a parable at the heart of it, and he's telling the story through the world of this gentleman, and it sticks. And so I think, to your point again, storytelling, hooks, examples, those are very, very palatable and they resonate, versus if you're just talking theory or philosophy. And we have to be conscious of this with our experts, because we always tell them, be mindful of the expert gap. When you're doing what you're doing every single day, when you're getting a PhD for something, you're at expert level 10. I mean, unequivocally, maybe even higher on a scale of 1 to 10. Your audience, the people who stand to be impacted by it the most, are at best 1 or 2. And that's
Right.
probably being generous. So when we talk, we're trying to really come across as like value forward and impressive, but still meeting them where they're at. And even if we try and meet them where they're at, we're hitting at a 5 or a 6, which is 4 critical points, maybe 5 critical points above where our audience is. And that's not going to help bridge that gap between where they are and where they need to be, with you as the bridge, if you're not meeting them where they are and showing them where they can be with your content.
Wow. So I love that because in my mind, what I'm seeing when you're talking about that is not just to like the external stakeholders and what you're posting on LinkedIn and how you're talking to prospects, but also inside the organization. Oftentimes, leadership, HR, they have this view of the organization and the big picture, and they take it for granted that they have that perspective and that their employees don't. And so they leave out all of those important details that could really help connect their employees to why this is so important. That all important why.
That's right. Yes, I will say, and if you're hearing the sounds of the city, it's just New York and the sirens. One of the things I think I learned most this year is we have a leadership coach, and we do a system called the Entrepreneur Operating System in our business. And they talk about the 5 leadership traits. And one of them is simplify, connect and empower, and then just restate and restate and restate. And if you feel like you're to the point where people are like, enough already, please stop saying it, you're probably just where you need to be
Right.
in saying it. And you should probably continue to. So, for example, our core values at our organization, every day on Huddle, we have a core value shout out where somebody shouts out, a colleague that has really exemplified one of the values. Every Monday business meeting, we review them. I mean, we're so values heavy that my team is probably like, enough already. I get it. Community, joy,
Right.
freedom, excellence, like stop.
Oh, I like that.
And yet any one of them could pick out a potential hire and say, they are or they're not going to be a great fit, because now it's in my bones. And I feel like that's the point of leadership and branding too. Repetition is key. I mean, psychologically, you need to hear something about 5 to 7 times before you create an association with it. And I think we discount that a lot in communication, thinking we're being unnecessarily redundant, when really, like, you're just at the tip of the iceberg of where you need to be in terms of really cementing something in somebody's mind.
So, but when you talked about simplify the message, so you're hitting them again and again with the message, and
Yes.
that makes a lot of sense. But you're also talking about simplifying. One thing I noticed was, everybody always sends me their intro to read off in the beginning of the show. You know how they like to be introduced. Yours is the shortest I've read, and it's not because of a lack of credentials, right?
Mm.
So I've noticed that with you. If I've got a problem, it's that when I feel like I need to post something on LinkedIn, it's like a 10 page like essay,
Yeah.
and you have this magic ability to do things, and like is there some sort of name for it, like like it's some sort of LinkedIn poetry, with a gap in the lines,
Oh,
like
yeah.
you've got that down to a science, and you say what you mean and you keep it simple. um, could you talk a little bit about that?
I think the thing that really had the most impact on me was years ago, I did a leadership program. It was a year in nature. And oh my gosh, okay, so we were at this leadership class, and a gentleman showed up late. And the leader made him go to the top of the room and do what they called restore integrity. And so you basically had to own your breakdown, explain the impact of it, and talk about a structure that you're putting in place so it would never happen again. That was the framework for it.
Right.
And so, absolutely, quality always beats quantity. So here this guy is at the top of the room, and he was going on for like 2 minutes. I don't know, traffic, this, that. And the teacher at the back of the room just said, just stop. And we were all like, you know how you're like a little kid in class, you're like, ooh, it's about to happen. Um, he said, nobody like cares. Just be brief, be bright, and be gone. Get to the heart of the matter. And I think that simplicity is the biggest indicator of mastery, more than anything else in the world. Like, you really experted on something when you can explain it simply. And I think we can fact check this after. Wasn't Einstein who said, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. And so for me, I think my intro and probably everything I write is just like, I want to get to the heart of the matter. I want to be as concise as possible, as sticky as possible. And then I want to get out of there, because the reader will do the job of filling in all that other stuff. And, or there's other formats for that. And so when we work with authors, your job is not to do a dissertation via social media. It's to get to the heart of the matter in a way that's relatable. If somebody is no concept of this idea, and then they buy the book, and then they'll sit with that journey for a while. And that's appropriate to a book context or a book format, but it's not when it comes to social media. I mean, my whole thing, and I was just talking to my strategists and writers about this the other day, is like, how can you make it less? And how can you make it less? And how can you make it less? And how do you get to the essence of something? And I think that that's harder than coming up with more ever will be.
Right. Yeah. I hope that everybody who does those like 5 hour long meetings that just eat up everybody's time, and by the way, is burning your employees out. I hope they're listening to this, because there is that idea, like, let's just get into the meeting and like take care of business. We could do the pre-work beforehand, and just get it done. But we tend to overcomplicate things. And I think a piece of that goes back to what you opened with, about it being more about us, and it has to be about them,
Yes.
when we're thinking about the message.
I
Yeah.
think a lot of times, whether we realize it or not, the more we drone on about something, it is about us. It's about our ego or our safety or us not getting to the point fast enough. And if you're really being empathetic to what your audience wants, they want the core of the matter, and that's pretty much it. And
Right.
I think the thing with lengthy meetings, I mean, again, time and a place for everything. Annual planning is usually a 2-day phenomenon, so there's that. But if you're in a 5-hour meeting, my first reaction is, then are you all really saying the truth?
Yeah.
Because usually the stuff that matters, that's like, it's the 20% that makes 80% of the difference. So let's just have the meeting about the 20% that's really going to make a difference in the organization. The 80% is it's other stuff. It's another format.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's almost like a procrastination from doing the actual work sometimes. It's
Yeah,
just
just talk about it. We'll all feel
yeah.
great about
Right. Exactly. Exactly. We're going to talk about what we're gonna do instead of doing it.
it.
Um, So I do want to go back to the beginning, and by beginning I mean beginning of your life. I love hearing people's origin stories because I think it's really helpful for people to understand how you got here, and we don't have to start with like the maternity ward, but how did you get into branding and this executive personal branding that you do? How did like how does that happen where you learned you had a gift in this?
Thanks. I tell people all the time when I became an entrepreneur, and a lot of people ask me, you know, when you were combing through business ideas, because I decidedly was an entrepreneur. I know a lot of people are like, I just kind of started and then it took off. It's like, no, I was like, I'm gonna start a business. And I was like always mapping out like, will it be a blog? Will it be a product business? Will it be a this? And I remember I was driving down 695 one day. Anybody around Baltimore will know that special treat. I was driving down 695 and I saw, I think it's Sherwin-Williams. I could
Hmm.
be wrong, or maybe it's DuPont. It's like a paint company, and it is a glow on their trucks. If anybody knows, please put it in the comment section. And it's like a bottle of red paint or a bucket of red paint is spilled, and it's like, paint the world. And you just see like the earth being covered in this like gloomy red paint. And I was just like, the hell does that mean? Like, paint the world. And then it's like, I don't know. It looks like you're kind of dumping red paint all over Earth. And I mean, this was back in 2014, like not a good look, especially where we're all going.
You said keep it simple,
Keep
right?
it simple, paint the world. Putting red paint on everything. And I remember I had this moment where I was like, oh my God, I'll never escape it. Everything I do, there's always this gut reaction of how I would have done it, how they would have packaged it better, positioned it better, framed it better. I mean, literally, anytime I'm stuck in traffic, I look at trucks that have ads on them and I'm just like, what do you, too many words, do this, do that. And that's when I had that moment of, well, if I'm going to start a business, it might as well be something that I couldn't stop, even if I tried, because starting a business, you never stop.
Right.
You never stop. And so I think that's the shorthand version of it. The longer story is I was in corporate marketing out of college in Baltimore, and I was working for a lending company that was just growing so quickly through mergers and acquisitions. After 2010 and Dodd-Frank and everything, a lot of smaller firms weren't equipped to handle the changing ecosystem, and they really were. And so I had to start rolling brands into brands at a very young age. And I credit my first boss for inviting me to the table to do that and giving me, trust in being able to do that. And so learning how you had to really get people to buy into a brand, not only externally, but internally. A big part of those acquisitions was the acquisition of the people at those other companies and how our brand was touching and inspiring them in an internal way. So I was doing that. I was debating starting a business. And then I just decided I'm going to start a brand consultancy because I'm doing this. And I was starting to speak on it in and around Baltimore to begin with. And then my cousin called me and said, you're never going to believe this, but we got the licenses to open medical marijuana dispensaries. And she said, would you feel comfortable branding it? I said, well, my father runs and all the training for the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms agency, so it might make for some awkward conversations. dinner table. But yeah, like, yeah, I don't care. Let's do it. I mean, I thought it was great. And so here we are, we're branding this dispensary in Maryland. Let me just paint the picture. She was a she had started her position as an engineer at Oracle, I believe, or like that was the genesis of her career trajectory. I think when she started the dispensary, she was like in her mid 50s. Her business partner was an OBGYN,
Hmm.
and she was stepping out of a 20-year, active practice. And they started this dispensary after my cousin wrote the proposal while cooking crock pot meals. I mean, it was hilarious. We just thought it was the funniest thing ever that here these two are who probably were spending most of their lives telling their children not to touch this stuff, now just peddling weed. I mean, I know that sounds incredibly reductive. I actually have an immense amount of respect for it as a medical form, but
Yeah.
we were like, this is hilarious. Look at this. Like these two suburban professional like moms, and now they're just out here slinging marijuana. Amazing. What a story. And then very quickly we found out that the industry, like most, even though it was new and cutting edge and whatever, was still like such a good old boys club. And we were pissed about it. I mean, we weren't getting access to the level of deals for product that some of the other dispensaries were.
Hmm.
And so one night we sat down, we're like, you know what? We're going to write a book. We're going to write a book about how two women found their footing in the cannabis industry. And so we found a ghostwriter, we published the book, we hired a PR agency, and I kid you not, in about a month to 2 months' time, they were on the Today Show with Maria Shriver, and our website for the dispensary crashed because there was like so much national traffic. Like, how can I come? I don't have a Maryland medical card, but my brother is really dealing with epilepsy, and you all like approach this in such a scientific way. And the PR agency said, do you do this for other authors? Because you have really turned them into like a not known quantity in
Right.
the cannabis industry, to now they're speaking, they're, going and opening conferences. And I said, absolutely not. It's a family business. I'm just consulting. And then about a year later, we decided, you know what, we're going to go for it. We're going to grow this agency. And then hence executive and author branding. It was so backflipped unintentionally into it, which sounds terrible, but in that way, it was very organic. We saw a hole in the market. We saw it was underserved, and we were like, I think we can really do this.
I love that. I love that. So then you're building your brand, and then you start bringing on employees. And so you're learning everything about branding. You know about branding organizations, and you're helping other people brand themselves, and you've branded yourself really well. And what about the employee piece? Suddenly you're an employer. Were there disconnects? Were there differences, or was it all sort of the same? Like what did you learn? What shocked you about that, if anything?
How fulfilling it is,
Yeah.
how hard it is, and not hard like, oh, people are so hard, because they're not. I mean, we're all human and messy. Hi, Juanita. Hard in the sense of, now I'm just going to go all therapy, but like when you're operating as a lone wolf in the world or a lone consultant, if you fail, it
Right.
doesn't really matter aside to you and like your family, probably,
Right.
right? That impact is kind of isolated in where the reverberations of it are. When you have employees, now you have them and their families and their aspirations, and they're taking a bet on you. I mean, truly, I think as employers, our first thought is, oh, I'm taking a chance on you, but
Right.
I've never approached it in that way. I always have just felt very honored that people saw the vision and would want to join in on it. So I think the thing that surprised me the most is I always thought working with the clients would be the most fulfilling thing, and it is. And watching the team grow and build relationships with clients has been the most fulfilling thing.
Yeah.
The hardest part is certainly just that fear of getting it wrong. I'm sure I don't have children, but how a parent feels like, I'm going to mess this kid up. I'm not going to provide it with the right things. I don't know if I have the right resources to do well by them. And that fear sits with me every single day, probably to an obnoxious degree. And they would probably say that too. Like, get off my back already. You're fine. It's fine. I'm here.
Yeah, that's I had a very similar feeling when my oldest son was born, and when I realized that the impact that I had as a business owner on my employees. It was a very similar feeling. It's like this weight being lowered onto your shoulders, that
Yeah.
this responsibility. And if you use it right, it actually drives you forward because you have no choice. You have to make this work. And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So that's really cool. You had similar.
I remember when we started, a bunch of them were 1099ing, contracting. I forget. I was telling that to somebody who was in Israel the other day, and he was like,
Yeah.
"What's a 1099?" I'm like, "Oh, don't mind me, my
Right.
just U.S. tax code language." They were contracting, and I just had this fear of extending full time W-2 to someone, and my mentor said, "You're growing a big girl business. You're making big girl moves. You gotta hire people.
Right.
Sorry, cupcake. Like, that's the deal. Like, it's scary. It's scary for you. It's scary for them. It's scary for everybody. But you're building a company. You're not building a side hustle. You're building a company. This is the next step." And I was just like, right, okay, yep, this is the this is the next step.
Yeah, but especially in marketing, you find a lot of these organizations that appear very large on the outside, even sometimes. Everybody's contracted, right? There's
Mhm.
no full time employees or even part time employees. Everybody's a contractor, and they outsource everything. Um, I think it makes a big difference when you really put some skin in the game and bring those people in, and they're putting skin in the game, and you're committing to each other. Uh,
It's again, can't say it, but I have experienced it, everything in parallel to my personal life. When I was casually dating, it was like, it's fine. My mess is my mess. Like, I don't really care. Like, if this thing explodes, I'm walking out, no strings attached. And now I'm in a very committed relationship, and you're like, oh man, we have to like figure this out together. I was just saying
right,
to my partner the other day, like, oh, it's so much easier when I just had to deal with my own crap by myself. Now I have to like work through my own baggage with you because it impacts you.
right,
And but like also so rewarding. So hard, but so rewarding to do that in partnership, whether it's in your personal life or in this case, I'd rather have 1% of 100 people's efforts than 100% of one person's effort. That will always win at the end of the day.
hmm,
And the diversity of thoughts and minds and opinions and strengths and weaknesses all blending together in this really wonderful alchemy. To your point, it's night and day when you're dealing with, core group who's bought in and you're bought in versus trying to create that in more of maybe a structurally fractured approach.
right. So that brings up a really interesting point, and actually, we need to just ask this, which I think is dead on with what you were just talking about, and I would just tack on that. I don't know if you've ever read the book Brand Harmony. I don't know if anybody besides for me has read this, but a long time ago, somebody gave me this little book called Brand Harmony, and it was all about branding. And the guy talks about his first experience walking into a Kmart after he had seen the commercials with Martha Stewart. And like he just imagined he was going to walk in, and there were going to be doves flying down the
Yeah.
aisles, and everything was a very different brand. And his argument is that we think we create our brand, but our customers actually label our brand. So internally, when you're building a culture and building your brand, inside, and you had spoken about how it's about your people, it's about them, not you.
Yeah.
So how do you drive the ship and steer while also making it about them? So as Juanita says, how do you know if your brand as an employer is the right brand for your employees? Who dictates what the brand is?
Such a good question. I think a lot of people think as branding as like a singular activity, or maybe not. I mean, we're in about to be in the year 2022. So I think that this has very much evolved. But I always tell people, like, branding isn't something you do, it's something you earn every single day. It's an activity, it's like a rite of passage, like going to the gym. It hurts, you're growing with the brand, and you're building up that brand. And the moment you stop, you'll atrophy. And so for us, I know it sounds very maybe simple, but how I know our brand is the right brand for our employees is we eat, breathe, live by, die by our core values. I mean, they are so intermeshed, so forward in every single thing we do. And this is something I credit, Mary Beth Highland to making me aware of. I told her one day, oh, we were working with this client and they were just so rude. And I was sharing this story and I said, so I got rid of the client. And she goes, wow, well, it sounds like there was a value trespassing that happened. And what probably stood out to your employees is you stepped in and said, this is who we are. They're not in alignment with it. And so I'm going to stand in front of all of you and say, we're not doing this anymore. And that's when our employees can spot that and they're living by those values and they're making decisions with those values as their, cardinal directions. That's how I know we've established the right brand. When employees or members of the team kind of like, our business coach says this, when your values are so strong and when that internal brand is so strong, you don't have to fire people. They leave on their own accord. They can feel, I'm not a fit. And same thing with clients. And so I think that's how we know, I think we've gotten it right, is that we've had a really, really clear perspective of what works and what doesn't, and who works and who doesn't. And those who work with those values and live by those values, they stay, whether that's employees or clients. And those who don't, they kind of pull their own parachute. They're out. And that's fantastic. The problem is, I think, when in branding and in life, you're trying to please everybody all the time, or you have table stakes core values where it's like, oh, integrity, like honesty. No, everybody should have that working.
Right.
Like, that's not a core DNA differentiator of your brand. But when you're not so resolute in those, that's when I think the employer brand suffers and the employees suffer as a result of that, because they couldn't stand in a decision without leadership present and say, according to our core values, this is the decision we're marching forward with. But if your values are there, they will, and they'll get it right like every single time.
Yeah. So I love the integrity one, because that's kind of just the organization signaling, don't steal from us. Don't screw us over. It doesn't typically end up working both directions in my experiences. But when you're talking about this and in talking about your clear values and your clear sort of brand and culture, which I'm sort of using interchangeably to a certain extent here, the fear I would have is on the other end of that. How do you encourage diversity and inclusion in all senses, but diversity of thought when, in order to stay competitive and stay fresh, and how does that work when it's so clear what it is? Where's the room for flexibility? Like, how do you build that into it?
Oh, that's so smart. It's a great question that I truthfully don't know if I could give a very clear answer to. And yet we've been blessed in bringing in so I'm going to try and self-analyze now and why that's happened for us and why we do have a diversity of background, mindset, and all types of people in the organization. I think you're absolutely right. There is, when the values are so laser sharp, it can become very culty, like drinking the Kool-Aid and just like, okay, well then you're out if you're thinking anything different than this. And in that way, it's like, okay, then is your core value set right? Because for example, for us, one of our core values is vulnerability. And you have to be, and the definition we have is the courage to be wrong every single day. And I think that evident in that has led to a diverse and inclusive workforce, because so many of us who are really, really trying to get that right and to make sure we're building diverse, equitable, and inclusive organizations, you got to challenge a lot of uncomfortable moments for yourself every single day. Past ways of thinking, assumed ways of thinking, different inherent biases that you may not even want to grapple with, but that you should. And so in that way, I think if the core values promote that, you don't have to worry about that. But again, I think that's probably self-analyzing out loud now.
Oh, and
So
I think
looking at it.
it makes total sense to me that the values have room. It doesn't dictate the specific action or specific way to think, but it's these values that underlie that, and they can sort of actualize in different ways for different people.
Absolutely. And so converse to that is if your value as an organization is achievement, and that's a core value, achievement, success, like get it doneness. Yeah, those are very aspirational as maybe a core value set, but you always also have to be looking at the unintended consequences of values like that.
Yeah.
And I would argue that if that's primarily the makeup of your core values and they're not bracketed or cushioned by other ones, then that can be uh, a nightmare in the brewing, even if you don't intend it to be. And so you have to be really mindful of what these values will really bring out in the best of worlds
Right.
and in your dream vision of it. And then if not checked, where do these go to like the dark dystopian future? And what are the bad examples of how these values can be actualized if we're not creating the examples and leading from out in front in what that means? And so I think we'd all be wise to think of both ends of the spectrum and the dichotomy of how that can go in our organization, because nobody intends their values to be bad or to be misleading. But yet we see organization after organization that isn't being run with integrity. And you're like, I learned this from the author Lorna Borenstein, who wrote a book called It's Personal, and it's a fabulous read. And she said, isn't it interesting that one of Enron's leading values was integrity? And how deliciously not true that clearly was.
Right. I think with true passion, you can bring different ideas. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you actualize the ideas in different ways, but everybody's on the same page in terms of what they believe in, like what this is about for them.
Yeah.
I did want to ask you, while we're talking about core values, so there's one that makes me gag anytime I see this word, especially on social media, because of the changing nature of it. And you tell me if I'm wrong. Any idea what I'm going to say?
No, there's so many that are just so like,
Okay.
you picture the eagle flying in the poster in the lunchroom, and you're just like, teamwork. And it's just like
Right.
like all Michael Scott posters in like The Office, and you're just like, oh.
Yes, right. I happen to love I don't think you can see with the shorter camera, but I've got my little Dwight bobblehead here.
Yeah, so good.
I think they
So
go.
good.
But okay, authenticity. I think that authenticity started as a real thing, and now if somebody's talking about authenticity, it's a pretty good bet that they're being inauthentic when they talk about it. Now, am I being overly cynical, or is that true? As a branding expert, how do you view authenticity as something that's very much a piece of everything now?
Yeah, so interesting. I would agree with that assessment. It's funny. I'm a part of the entrepreneur organization, and one of their values was, I don't know if presently is, sorry, EO, is it was like, be cool. And one of our group leaders was like, I freaking hate that value, because if you're cool, you don't need to say it. Like, or if you're just
Right.
like being cool, like that's not a value. And to your point, it's like the same thing with authenticity. Like if you're authentic, it means you're living in your values. It's not
Right.
a singular value. Authenticity is you are, to borrow words from another author that we had the pleasure of working with, Risha Grant. She's writing a book called Radical Acceptance. And I think that that's more it. It's like, I radically accept who I am and who others are. And I am accepting my values, and I'm the embodiment of those values. And I don't need to say it, because if I'm saying it, I'm probably not doing it. So yes, I think to your point, there's very much a underlying air of like, not those who can't teach do and those who
Right.
do can't teach, but it's like the same thing. Like you're saying it, it's an action more than maybe it is like a singular value. Now, having said that, taking a lot of values assessments, it is registered as a value. For me personally, I just find it to be more of a barometer of if I'm living my values versus a standalone value.
Yeah, yeah. And as a leader who's building their personal image and personal brand, trust is like number one. It is the most valuable asset that you can have in your relationships, both external, I would imagine, but also internal for sure.
Yeah.
And there's some people that actually come off as authentic, and other people who come off as trying to be authentic.
Hmm.
Where is that thin line? Have you seen this? Like, do you experience this the same way that I do?
Yes. Oh, it's so, I don't even know if this is a good example. I guess being vulnerable, this is LinkedIn. It's so hard to pinpoint. It's like, you know how the United States, I think the law says about porn, it's like I couldn't lay out the framework for what it is, but I know it when I
All
see
right.
it.
Yeah.
It's like
Right.
that's the definition
Yeah.
of it. I feel like it's the same thing to your point. Like I couldn't tell you exactly like the break points, but
Yeah.
I you know it when you see it, and you know if there's trust there or if there isn't. And a lot of that is in, I think, the day-to-day micro moments of how you're interacting with your team versus any kind of like grand gestures.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. It is those little things, and maybe disconnects between messages and things like that. I don't know. I don't know. And then I also always feel awful. I probably shouldn't admit it, although I'm sure I've admitted it in things in the past. But whenever I see somebody cry on LinkedIn, immediately my barometer goes up. And I'm like why is this happening like there? Like sometimes it might be to be vulnerable and show some, but other times it seems manipulative and
Produced.
yeah, right, right, right.
Yeah, I think that is really the challenge, I think, with personal branding and creating content. And I was reading, it was a recap of a LinkedIn Live where two individuals were discussing this. Like, oh my gosh, like the violins of the world all play at once on LinkedIn these days. Everybody is just sad and going through difficult times. And it's, I think the intent there is usually to show that you can get through things. And I appreciate that because social media so long was the other, like the shiny, glossy veneer of like, I'm fine, everything's fine, everything
Right,
great, in fact, when that is so not the case.
right.
But I did like how one of them stated, they said, focus on the scab, not the wound, in terms of like what you really learned and what the bounce back story was versus just sitting in the suck of it all. And I'm not saying like don't feel your feelings and don't really work through that, of course. But I think sometimes it can air a little bit inauthentic or produced if that's the core focus of it,
Yeah.
versus that opportunity we all have to reflect where the breakdown was and where the breakthrough is.
The breakdown and the breakthrough. I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So I want to give you an opportunity to share where we can find you, because clearly we could go on forever, but we're running against time. But I really did think, what a great time to have you on, especially with all this in the news with better.com and whatever. And what that illustrates to me is that like the lines are thinning between internal and external, and the way we communicate and the way we build our brands. There has to be some sort of common theme, otherwise it's going to get you.
Oh yeah. You know what's so interesting to me about the better.com situation is, I mean, it's so layered, right? It really is. And you can look at it from so many different angles. In that, I mean, truly, if some people were only working 2 hours a day and clocking 2 hours a day, that's not integrous. Like that's just that. And, you know, the sheer number of people. I was talking about this with a prospect. You're like trying to tell me that many people were clocking 2 hours a day. What is the culture problem there then
Right.
that would allow for that behavior, or even, I don't know. But the thing that really stuck for me and really kind of like was interesting to me was when he said in the video, this is very hard for me. And last time I did this, I cried.
Right.
And I was like, going to your point, like, yeah, no crap. Like, it's hard for you. Nobody likes firing anybody. And that to me was a moment where it's more about me than it is about you. I'm going to sit here and say, I'm going to soften the blow by telling you how hard this is for me.
Right.
Then really empathetically having a conversation of how this is going to impact your life. We need to let you go.
Right.
And going back to as a leader, as somebody who's building a brand, as all these things, building for your audience versus yourself, that moment to me really stuck out and I've probably said that in conversations before. And so that's probably why it dug even further, is like, ooh, yeah, note to self, like that is not something that you should say, but this is really hard for me. Oh, great. Good. Thank you for that. As I'm like now out of work, really appreciate how difficult this is for you.
Yeah.
You poor thing.
There was so much irony in that, the better.com thing, and also him stating that this is really hard for him. He had no idea how hard it was going to be for him with the fallout.
Right. Oh, yeah, I know. You thought it was hard right now, buddy. Right. You buckle up. Yeah.
Wow. But that comes to true authenticity, because the truth is people are always watching now, and you got to be consistent. And if you're going to call yourself better.com, you better do that. Right.
Yes. I think at the end of the day, if we're really talking about integrity, and I know we've kind of jabbed at it here and there, but I love the definition, and I forget who said it, which is what you're thinking, what you're saying, and you're doing is all the same all the time. And I mean, that's it. Consistency, that alignment of what you're thinking, what you're doing, what you're saying is always right there. Then you're probably living an authentic life. And sometimes that's going to get messy. And hopefully we all give ourselves the grace to work through those. But I think that that's a lesson we'd all be well to, really take on for ourselves.
Yeah, I love that. I'm so grateful that you were here today to share all this with us, because, like I said, if somebody's watching this either live or on the replay and they are not connected with you, they better make that happen. I personally would start with LinkedIn, because that's, you're constantly putting out like quality stuff on LinkedIn. And I think that's awesome. If they raise their phone up and hover over that QR code over there, that will take them directly to your website, which is great. And how else can people get in touch with you?
LinkedIn for sure. I mean, I'm on Instagram. You're probably going to get more of the fun New York stuff than you are the branding stuff. So if that's your cup of tea or cup of coffee, if you're a New Yorker, like that's where you probably want to go for that. But LinkedIn is definitely, I love it. We were talking right before we logged on about how I just crossed 15,000 followers, and like my complicated inner dialogue with that of like, oh, it was great for you. Like, wow, 15,000. But then as I took the time to reflect on it, like I'm just so grateful for LinkedIn as a platform. And not only do we build our business off it, I do find that, speaking of authentic and nuanced and conversations with integrity, is it going to be 100% of the time? No. But when I look at that against other platforms, I do find it most present on LinkedIn. And I think they've done a phenomenal job making sure that that's the case, and making sure that the community is living by those values more so than other platforms. So LinkedIn is where my heart is.
Yeah. I love that you literally went out and got balloons. That was awesome. I
was like, this feels obnoxious, but here we are. Get the camera ready.
Oh, it's great. It's literally what you do, though. You do this for other people. So the celebration is even more meaningful. The vanity metric isn't just a vanity metric for you. This is what you do. So
yeah. And every single one of those people, I mean, not all 15,000, please. Anybody would be lying. Every single one of you, 15,000. But it was over the period of 10 years, and I do very much remember key moments and key people, and now
Yeah.
great friends that transpired from that. And so
Yeah.
it's so much more. Somebody said this in the comment section. It's the quality of that 15,000 and who
Right.
those people are that's so much more than that actual number.
Right. Yeah. I've been amazed the conversations that get going and the relationships that are formed over LinkedIn even before 2020. And then when COVID hit and it was like that was my outlet with the world to some extent. Um,
Yeah.
that was pretty great. It's a cool platform. So are all the other platforms, by the way, that you may be viewing this from. But LinkedIn is definitely a great place to have like deeper conversations, I find.
Yeah.
Speaking of deep conversations, I hope that you all can join us next week. We're gonna have a pre-recorded session because my wife Rachel Shar is gonna be on, and we're gonna talk about role conflict in our family with 5 kids, 4 jobs between us, and a whole lot of chaos. We left out the fact that we also have a 140-pound Bernese Mountain Dog. So that's why we're pre-recording, because my kids might make a guest appearance. The dog might make a guest appearance. You never know. And also this way, if my wife says really mean things about me, I can sort of edit it out. So I'm more nervous about this than any previous interview. But I hope you can join us. It will be streaming live, and I'll be online to answer any questions and read your comments. And that's next Wednesday, 12 p.m. Eastern time. Thank you so much, Kate. This has been absolutely a pleasure. Please connect with Kate in those various ways, and you won't regret it.
Thanks, David. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Bye.